West Africa is breaking up with its colonizer. Senegal just moved to ditch France's currency, the franc, a currency that helped France control African countries long after independence.
What happens when a nation decides, overnight, to cut the very strings that have guided its economy and guarded its borders for decades? On April 8, 2025, Senegal did exactly that, announcing it would abandon the France-backed CFA franc and ordering all French troops to leave by September. Two of Paris's strongest levers in West Africa, dismantled in a single morning. But why target the CFA franc first? And what does that reveal about Senegal's real fight for sovereignty? Let's find that out. When Senegal's leadership moved against the CFA franc and ordered the departure of French troops, the announcements may have sounded like two separate policies. But in reality, they were twin strikes at the same target, dismantling the core mechanisms through which France has maintained influence over West African states long after independence. The CFA franc has been in place for nearly 80 years, introduced in 1945 when France sought to bind its African colonies into a single monetary framework. Over time, it evolved into two distinct regional currencies for West and Central Africa, but its structure barely changed. The key feature remained. Member countries had to deposit 50% of their foreign reserves into the French treasury. France guaranteed convertibility to the euro, but in exchange it retained a say, direct or indirect, over monetary policy. For critics in Senegal and beyond, this system was never about stability. It was about control. By setting the rules of monetary engagement, France ensured that African economies remained tied to European interests, particularly through trade patterns that favored raw material exports over industrial growth. Countries like Senegal could not freely adjust their currency value to boost exports or protect domestic industries. Those decisions were effectively made in Paris. This is why President Bassirou Diomaye Faye's decision to abandon the CFA franc was so much more than a technical monetary policy change. It was the severing of an umbilical cord that many believed kept African economies in a perpetual state of dependence. The same logic applies to the presence of French troops. Officially framed as a security partnership, it placed French military assets in strategic positions within Senegal, from Dakar's bases to intelligence facilities. While such arrangements were justified in the Cold War era as a defense against external threats, they increasingly became symbols of incomplete sovereignty. Critics argued that a foreign army on Senegalese soil meant that in moments of crisis, ultimate power still rested in Paris. In recent years, the security arrangement has also become politically toxic in the region. Neighboring Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger had already expelled French forces, each citing the need to reclaim control over national defense. Senegal's announcement placed it firmly within this growing trend, signaling that it too was unwilling to have foreign military policy dictated, even in part, by a former colonial ruler. This pairing of economic and military breaks is what gives April 8, 2025, its historic weight. By tackling both simultaneously, Faye sent a clear message. This is not gradual reform, it is rupture. The risk is obvious. Exiting the CFA franc without a ready alternative could destabilize markets, and replacing French security guarantees will require significant domestic investment. But the reward, in the eyes of his administration, outweighs the dangers. The ability to decide Senegal's future without external vetoes. This is why the announcements were delivered with such urgency. The administration sees the current moment as a narrow window in which regional momentum is on Senegal's side. Across West Africa, leaders are talking openly about post-French futures. Aligning Senegal's actions with that trend increases the chance of building a united front, both economically and politically. However, removing the CFA franc from Senegal's economy raises a crucial next question. What comes after it? Currency independence is only meaningful if it's paired with a viable replacement that can anchor trade, investment, and development. For Senegal, that proposed replacement is the ECO, the long-discussed common currency of the ECOWAS bloc. The problem is that the ECO has been delayed for years. Meeting the strict economic criteria for its adoption has proven challenging for multiple member states. Yet for Senegal, Success in this transition will be the real measure of whether April 8th marks the beginning of sovereignty or simply the start of economic uncertainty. Which brings us to the next step in this story. What exactly is the ECO, and how can it transform Senegal's economic future? The ECO is more than a currency proposal. It is an entire economic vision for West Africa. Backed by the Economic Community of West African States (ECOWAS), it aims to unify 15 diverse economies under one monetary system, making trade and investment easier within the region while reducing reliance on external currencies like the euro or the US dollar. For Senegal, joining the ECO is not simply about replacing the CFA franc with a different name. It is about aligning itself with a regional movement toward integration and mutual economic defense. In theory, a common currency can unlock powerful advantages: lower transaction costs for cross-border trade, unified pricing across member states, and stronger bargaining power when negotiating with global markets. Yet the path to the ECO has been fraught with delays. The West African Monetary Institute has set rigorous convergence criteria that each member must meet before adoption. These include keeping inflation below single digits, maintaining budget deficits at or under 3% of GDP, ensuring stable foreign exchange reserves, and harmonizing monetary policy frameworks across countries with vastly different economies. Some nations have struggled to hit these benchmarks due to political instability, fluctuating commodity prices, or heavy debt burdens. For Senegal, however, the challenge is not just economic, it's political. The credibility of the ECO project depends on whether ECOWAS can prevent the currency from becoming another mechanism of dependency, this time controlled from within Africa rather than outside it. President Bassirou Diomaye Faye has been outspoken in pushing for safeguards to ensure that no single member state can dominate monetary decisions, a clear reflection of his broader sovereignty agenda. The potential rewards of the ECO are substantial. By facilitating regional trade, it could help shift West African economies away from their dependence on raw commodity exports to Europe and toward value-added manufacturing and services that can circulate within the bloc. For Senegal specifically, sectors like agriculture, fisheries, and light manufacturing stand to gain from easier access to neighboring markets without the cost and delays of currency conversion. But the ECO's success also hinges on trust. Trust between member states to manage fiscal policy responsibly. Trust in the central banking structure that will be established, and trust among citizens who must be convinced to adopt and use the new currency in their daily lives. Faye's government is already working on a domestic campaign to explain the benefits and address concerns, aware that a currency's value is as much about public confidence as it is about economic fundamentals. Importantly, Senegal is not waiting passively for the ECO to arrive. The government is using the interim period to strengthen its fiscal discipline, diversify exports, and renegotiate foreign contracts to ensure that the country's economic base is solid when the transition comes. This includes investment in infrastructure that connects Senegal more efficiently to its ECOWAS neighbors, from upgraded highways to digital trade platforms. Yet while the ECO addresses the monetary side of independence, sovereignty is not secured through economics alone. The security question remains unresolved. If Senegal is to stand on its own economically, it must also ensure that its defense capabilities match its ambitions. Without a credible security strategy, economic sovereignty could be undermined by instability or external pressure. Which leads us to the next pressing question: how will Senegal protect its newfound autonomy once the safety net of French military presence is gone? Let's pause for a second to say, big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. The decision to remove French troops from Senegal is more than a symbolic gesture. It is a security gamble. For decades, French military forces have provided rapid response capabilities, intelligence support, and logistical infrastructure that Senegal's defense forces have never had to fully replicate. Now, with a deadline set for their departure by September 2025, the country must confront the practical challenge of filling that gap. Senegal's armed forces are respected in the region for their professionalism and discipline, but they have historically operated within the safety net of French assistance. That has meant access to advanced surveillance systems, airlift capabilities, and training programs that are expensive to maintain independently. Without those resources, the military will have to adapt to a more self-reliant model, one that relies heavily on domestic capacity and carefully chosen alliances. President Bassirou Diomaye Faye has already signaled a two-pronged approach. The first prong is internal reinforcement, modernizing the Senegalese military's equipment, expanding special forces units, and enhancing cyber defense capabilities to address emerging threats. Plans are underway to upgrade air reconnaissance and naval patrol fleets, particularly to secure Senegal's Atlantic coastline and exclusive economic zone, where offshore oil and gas projects are becoming strategically vital. The second prong is regional cooperation. Senegal is leaning into ECOWAS's security frameworks, including the standby force designed for rapid deployment in cases of regional instability. The idea is that by pooling resources with neighbors, no single state bears the full cost of high-readiness defense. This approach also positions Senegal as a proactive contributor to West Africa's collective security, rather than a passive beneficiary of foreign protection. There is also a strategic diversification element at play. With French forces leaving, Senegal is exploring training exchanges and equipment deals with countries as varied as Turkey, China, and Brazil, nations that can provide military technology without the political baggage associated with former colonial powers. Turkey, for instance, has already made inroads in West Africa by supplying drones and armored vehicles, while China has offered naval patrol vessels and communication systems to several coastal states. Critics worry that replacing one set of foreign suppliers with another could recreate dependency in a different form. To address this, Faye's administration is emphasizing building domestic defense industries. That means investing in local manufacturing of uniforms, light weapons, and potentially even parts for armored vehicles, keeping more of the defense budget circulating within the national economy. Security independence also requires intelligence independence. One of the less visible aspects of French military presence has been their intelligence sharing network, which covered everything from counterinsurgency operations in the Sahel to maritime piracy monitoring in the Gulf of Guinea. Senegal will now need to strengthen its intelligence infrastructure, both human and technological, to ensure early warning capabilities remain intact. This includes developing partnerships with African intelligence networks and training more local analysts to interpret and act on security data without external mediation. The stakes are high. Senegal sits at the westernmost edge of Africa, making it both a gateway to the Atlantic trade routes and a potential entry point for transnational threats, from smuggling networks to insurgent groups displaced from other regions. Losing the immediate deterrent effect of a French military presence could embolden some actors to test the country's defenses. This is why the government's strategy is being rolled out quickly and publicly, both to reassure citizens and to signal to potential adversaries that the end of French troops does not mean a vacuum in security. Instead, it is being framed as a chance to redefine security policy in a way that aligns with national and regional interests rather than the priorities of an outside power. Still, securing borders and coastlines is only part of the equation. The other part is determining which global partners Senegal will lean on for its next phase of development. The choice of partners will shape not only the country's security posture, but also its economic and diplomatic trajectory for decades. And that leads to the next critical question. If Senegal is turning away from Paris, who will it turn toward, and why are BRICS nations at the center of that strategy? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. With France's economic and military footprint shrinking, Senegal's leadership is not leaving its next chapter to chance. President Bassirou Diomaye Faye's administration has been explicit about where it wants to look for new strategic partnerships, and the direction is unmistakably toward the BRICS bloc: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. This is not a sudden fascination. For years, Senegal has observed how BRICS members have leveraged South-South cooperation to build infrastructure, industrialize, and lift millions out of poverty without relying on Western development models. The bloc now accounts for a growing share of global GDP and has been actively courting African countries as part of its vision for a more multipolar world order. For Faye, aligning with BRICS is about securing access to resources, markets, and technology under terms that are negotiated on equal footing. not inherited from colonial frameworks. China already has a visible footprint in Senegal, with projects ranging from highways to sports stadiums. But the shift Faye envisions is about deepening those relationships in ways that tie directly into Senegal's sovereignty goals. Infrastructure investment, for example, is being structured to ensure local content requirements, meaning Senegalese workers, suppliers, and contractors must be integral to the delivery of major projects. Russia offers another dimension: energy and defense cooperation. As Senegal moves toward greater energy independence, including offshore oil and gas production, Russian technology and expertise in the energy sector present an alternative to Western oil majors. In defense, Moscow's willingness to sell advanced equipment without imposing political conditions is attractive to a government wary of repeating past dependencies. Brazil brings agricultural technology and biofuel expertise, two areas that align with Senegal's goal of modernizing its farming sector and reducing food import dependency. India, meanwhile, offers opportunities in pharmaceuticals, information technology, and vocational training. South Africa, the bloc's African member, provides a model for industrial policy and access to the African Continental Free Trade Area (AfCFTA) networks. The strategic appeal of BRICS is also institutional. The bloc's new development bank, NDB, positions itself as an alternative to the World Bank and IMF, promising financing without the structural adjustment programs that have historically constrained African economies. Senegal sees in the NDB a potential source of funding for infrastructure and industrial projects that would otherwise be delayed or reshaped to fit donor priorities from the West. Still, this pivot is not without risks. Deep engagement with BRICS means balancing relationships with powers that have their geopolitical rivalries. It also requires ensuring that, in diversifying away from France and traditional Western partners, Senegal does not become overly dependent on any single BRICS member. The administration is aware of this and is pursuing a multi-vector approach, building ties with all BRICS members, while also strengthening links with other emerging economies such as Turkey, Indonesia, and Mexico. Public diplomacy plays a key role in this strategy. The government is framing its BRICS engagement not as an anti-Western crusade, but as a pragmatic step toward a balanced foreign policy. Domestically, this helps reassure citizens that Senegal is not swapping one set of masters for another. Internationally, it signals to all partners that Dakar values cooperation but insists on mutual respect. Senegal's potential integration into BRICS-aligned initiatives also dovetails with its role in ECOWAS. By acting as a bridge between the West African bloc and BRICS economies, Senegal could position itself as a regional hub for trade, logistics, and diplomatic engagement. This would enhance its leverage in both African and global negotiations, giving it a voice that reflects more than just national interests. But aligning with BRICS and diversifying partnerships will only matter if Senegal can translate these connections into tangible benefits for its people, jobs, infrastructure, energy access, and technological capacity. That is where the domestic agenda intersects with the foreign policy vision. And this raises the final decisive question in Senegal's sovereignty drive. Will these sweeping reforms and new alliances truly deliver the independence and prosperity that President Faye has promised? With the CFA franc on its way out, French troops preparing to leave, and new alliances forming with BRICS and other emerging powers, Senegal has set itself on a path that is as ambitious as it is uncertain. The moves have been bold, the rhetoric uncompromising, but the ultimate measure will be whether these decisions produce lasting independence and prosperity for its citizens. The first test will be economic resilience during the transition. A currency shift is not just an administrative change, it is a psychological one. Citizens, investors, and trading partners must believe in the stability and value of the new system. Any misstep in the ECO rollout or delays in meeting ECOWAS convergence criteria could trigger inflationary pressures or a drop in investor confidence. To counter this, the government is working on strengthening reserves, diversifying export markets, and boosting domestic production so that shocks are less likely to undermine the transition. A second test will be the ability to maintain security without leaning on a foreign guarantor. French troops may be gone, but the threats they once helped to deter remain. Illegal fishing fleets in Senegalese waters, trafficking networks exploiting porous borders, and insurgent groups seeking new footholds in the region. The success of the security strategy will depend not just on military modernization, but also on intelligence capabilities, regional coordination, and the political will to address root causes of instability, such as unemployment and uneven development. Diplomatic agility will also be critical. While BRICS partnerships promise investment and technology, they are not immune to geopolitical friction. China and India have their rivalries. Russia faces sanctions and diplomatic isolation from much of the West. Brazil's political priorities can shift dramatically with leadership changes. Senegal will need to manage these relationships without becoming entangled in their disputes, ensuring that its development agenda remains the central focus. Domestically, the biggest challenge will be public expectations. By framing these reforms as a sovereignty revolution, President Bassirou Diomaye Faye has set a high bar. Citizens will expect tangible results, jobs created, infrastructure improved, and living standards raised, within a reasonable time frame. If these benefits fail to materialize, political support could erode, giving opponents an opening to reverse or dilute the reforms. One advantage Senegal has is the regional momentum behind decolonization efforts. The expulsion of French forces from Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger has created a shared political narrative in West Africa. If Senegal can translate its break from France into measurable gains, it could inspire others to follow, creating a bloc of states with aligned policies on trade, security, and diplomacy. This, in turn, would give the region more leverage in dealing with both Western and non-Western powers. Another factor is Senegal's cultural and intellectual capital. Dakar has long been a hub for African thought, art, and diplomacy. By positioning itself as both a political and cultural leader in the post-colonial movement, Senegal can wield soft power to complement its economic and security strategies. This could involve hosting regional summits, championing African-led conflict resolution, or promoting cultural exchange initiatives that strengthen ties within the continent. Yet the most profound measure of success will not be in headlines or diplomatic communiques. It will be in whether Senegal's people feel a genuine sense of ownership over their country's direction. True sovereignty is not just the absence of foreign control. It is the presence of domestic agency, where national priorities are set by the citizens and executed by accountable institutions. That requires building transparent governance systems, combating corruption, and ensuring that reforms are not just top-down edicts, but collective projects. Senegal's gamble is a high-stakes one. If it works, it could mark the beginning of a new chapter in African self-determination, with Dakar as a model for how to break from inherited dependency and thrive. The next few years will reveal which way the story goes. For now, Senegal stands at a crossroads, its old ties to France severing, its new alliances forming, and its people watching to see if this bold march toward independence will indeed deliver the freedom and prosperity they have been promised. Will the ECO launch on time and stabilize the economy? Will Senegal's defense hold without a foreign safety net? Let us know in the comments section. Will these bold moves truly deliver the independence its people have been promised? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.